All right. When we talk about removing a leader from office, I'm not talking about like needing to improve on a performance review. We're talking about the kind of situation that ends up in history books. So today, we're diving deep into Kenya's constitution, specifically how it handles the removal of a deputy president.
Yeah. It's a pretty weighty topic, right? Every democracy needs a clear process for these situations. But the stakes are incredibly high. I think what's so fascinating about Kenya's system is it has echoes of other democracies, but it also has these really unique elements that make it really stand out.
So, like, no pressure or anything, but we're talking about rules that could actually make or break a presidency.
Right. Absolutely.
And we're going to start with Article 150. That lays out the two main reasons that a deputy president might be removed.
Right. So the first is pretty straightforward. If they're unable to do the job, if something happens and they're physically or mentally incapable of carrying out their duties.
So that's incapacity, a really tough situation. And then there's the second one, impeachment, which I feel like always grabs the headline.
Right. And for a good reason. I mean, it's essentially a political trial. And it's a process with really serious implications. Article 150 gets into the nitty-gritty. It outlines 3 scenarios that could trigger this whole impeachment thing.
Okay.
And 2 of them are pretty clear-cut. Violating the Constitution or laws, whether Kenyan or international, those are grounds for impeachment. And then even just a suspicion of committing a crime. That can be enough to start the process rolling.
So it's not even just about proven facts. It's even accusations could potentially lead to impeachment. That's intense. And then there's this third scenario. It uses the phrase gross misconduct. That seems, I don't know, awfully broad, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right to hone in on that. Gross misconduct is intentionally broad. On the one hand, it gives them flexibility to address situations they couldn't have predicted, decades ago when they were writing the Constitution. But, and this is crucial, it also opens the door for interpretation and maybe even abuse, depending on who's in power at the time.
It's like having this giant to be determined sign just hanging over the whole process.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about like the potential for those in power to just use this.
Oh, absolutely.
To target their rivals. Like, you can see why this article alone would make somebody nervous if they were deputy president.
Exactly. And that's where, understanding the intricacies of the removal process become even more important. And that's where Articles 144 and 145 come into play, because they outline the how of removal.
Hold on. Before we jump into those.
Yeah.
You mentioned something interesting earlier. You said these articles apply to both the president and the deputy president.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so while these procedures are technically written for removing the president, they apply almost identically to the deputy president, with just a few minor adjustments.
Okay, so what we're really talking about is a system with potential ramifications for really like the highest levels of Kenyan leadership.
Precisely. And that's why understanding these next 2 articles is so crucial. They are the safeguards, the rules of the game that determine how this high-stakes process would actually play out.
Okay, so we're about to get into Articles 144 and 145. And these, they lay out that step-by-step process for removing a president or a deputy president in Kenya.
Yeah, it's like we're stepping into a political procedural drama, except this is real life with, real consequences.
With real consequences.
Exactly.
So Article 144, that's our incapacity scenario where somebody is just like too ill or unable to fulfill their duties.
Exactly. So let's say there are concerns about the deputy president's ability to serve. It's not just a matter of anyone saying, hey, I don't think they're up to it. Article 144 gives that power to the members of Kenya's National Assembly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a built-in check to prevent like frivolous attempts at removal.
Exactly.
It can't just be a few disgruntled politicians stirring the pot.
Absolutely. In fact, a quarter of the entire National Assembly has to agree. To even start looking into the deputy president's capacity to serve.
That's a pretty significant chunk of the assembly.
It is.
So it's not a decision that they would be taking lightly. So let's say they do hit that threshold. What happens next?
Things get even more serious. The Speaker of the Assembly has to inform the Chief Justice, the big boss of the judicial system.
Right.
And then they start the process of forming a special tribunal.
A tribunal. Sounds very official. Like, are we talking wigs and gavels and the whole shebang?
You're not far off. And it's here where things get really, really interesting. So the tribunal isn't just some, randomly assembled group. It's made up of 3 top-notch doctors. A lawyer who's nominated by the bar, and get this, 1 person nominated by the president themselves.
Wait, hold on. The president gets a say in who judges their own ability to be president.
Yeah.
That seems I don't know. It's a little bit like letting the student grade their own homework.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive, right? But remember, it's all about balance. Yes, the president gets a say, but the tribunal's decision is final. No appeals, no do-overs. So that one presidential pick is a factor, but not the deciding one.
So it's like a high-stakes game of chess.
Yeah.
Where each side is making these very strategic moves. Okay, so that's incapacity. What about Article 145 and the impeachment process? This is where things, I feel like, get even more intense, right?
Absolutely. Impeachment, as you can imagine, is treated very, very seriously, and you need more members of the assembly to even initiate the process. A full third compared to a quarter for incapacity, higher stakes, higher bar for entry.
It makes you wonder, like,
Yeah.
what were the framers of the Constitution thinking when they set those different thresholds?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? It suggests that they wanted to make incapacity a process that could be initiated relatively swiftly if needed, while impeachment, with its political weight, required a greater consensus.
Yeah.
But either way, once that threshold is met, the action shifts to the Senate.
The Senate. So we're talking about Kenya's upper house of parliament.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're the ones who hear the charges against the deputy president, and they can choose to form a special committee to investigate. Think of it like a grand jury in some other systems, tasked with, examining the evidence and determining if there's enough to proceed.
So it's like, we're at the climax of the legal drama, right? We've got the Senate committee. They've done their investigating, heard from all sides. What happens next? Is it just like a simple majority vote, like thumbs up, thumbs down on the deputy president?
Not quite. It's a lot more intense than a simple majority. So the Senate votes on those impeachment charges. But to actually remove the deputy president, they need a supermajority. We're talking at least 2/3 of all the senators have to vote in favor of upholding those charges.
Wow. That's a pretty high bar to clear.
Yeah, you would need a near unanimous decision to remove a leader that way.
It really highlights how seriously the Constitution takes this whole process.
It does.
Because you're ensuring a certain level of stability. Knowing that to remove a leader requires like this overwhelming agreement.
Right.
And not just a narrow political win.
You don't want a system that's vulnerable to, every shift in the political winds. It makes you really think about those checks and balances we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
The assembly can initiate the process, but they don't have absolute power. The deputy president has rights throughout this whole thing, and ultimately it's the Senate that holds that final say.
It's this fascinating dance between accountability and stability, right? Where you want a system where leaders are held responsible for their actions, but you also don't want to paralyze a government with like constant upheaval based on flimsy accusations, just partisan politics.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to the bigger picture, right? The so what of all of this. We've gone deep into the mechanics of these articles, the step-by-step of how a removal could actually play out. But like, what does it all mean for Kenya, for its people?
It's like those intricate clock towers you see, right? Lots of moving parts, but they exist to tell something much bigger, time itself. And in this case, these articles, on the surface, they're about this very specific legal process of removing one person. But at their core, they're about safeguarding something much, much bigger. The rule of law itself.
That's so. Because, I get that it's about process. But how does a removal process, as intense as this one is, connect to something like as fundamental as the rule of law?
Because it ensures that even the most powerful person in the country, in this case the deputy president, is still subject to the law. It's a powerful message. Power isn't absolute. There are mechanisms for accountability, and that is a cornerstone of any functioning democracy.
It's almost like a safety valve.
Yeah.
It's there if it's needed, but the very fact that it exists, that it's enshrined in their Constitution, I feel like it changes how people act, how they wield power.
Precisely. It encourages a certain level of caution, maybe even self-reflection from those in positions of authority. And for the people, it empowers them through their representatives to hold their leaders accountable.
Fascinating, right? We started this deep dive talking about like those make or break moments in history.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that these articles, they're almost like a roadmap for navigating those moments, but in a way that upholds the law and doesn't just throw it out the window.
Absolutely. They're the guardrails of Kenyan democracy. They can be tested, they can be debated, but they exist to ensure that no matter how heated things get, how high passions run, there's a process in place to address even the most extraordinary situations.
It really makes you think. If you could, like, handpick one thing for our listeners to walk away pondering, what would it be? What's that final thought to, like,
Yeah.
spark their curiosity even further.
I'd ask them to consider this. What would it really take to activate these articles in the real world? What chain of events, what balance of political forces would have to be in play for this process to actually unfold? Because understanding that is key to understanding not just Kenyan politics, but the dynamics of power in any system, where leadership and accountability are constantly in tension.
It's been fascinating taking this deep dive with you today.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.